Well, I don't know if this will be more of a sermon or a rant, but the pastor thought it would be timely. I think it'll be timely. I'd like to bring a message entitled, If We Were Free, 100 Things That Would Be Different. Because I don't believe that we aren't very free in this country, and I think it's time we address this sacred cow and that we got rid of this elephant in the room, so to speak. So let's pray and then let's dive in. Father, we thank you for this church. We thank you for your word. We thank you for your truth and the peace that it can bring into our lives if we will simply let it. Help us to face the ugly truth of this country. Father, be with our country and wake some people up, call out some people to be saved and to go into ministry. The fields are white unto harvest, but the TVs are flickering in every living room and no one seems to care really anymore. So please, Father, make a difference in our country and our lives. Use us to wake people up. Amen.
Amen.
Harriet Tubman, who was a former slave who helped to free many slaves in the Underground Railroad, she had a very profound statement one time. She said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if they knew they were slaves."
Amen.
1,000 more if they knew they were slaves. The first step to solving any problem is to acknowledge that there is a problem. Every year, on July 4th, Americans partake in a rather confusing and disturbing exercise in denial.
Right.
Big and small, black and white, rich and poor, liberal, conservative, it doesn't matter. The majority of Americans take a day off from the job they spend 40 to 60 hours a week at, bring together the family they rarely ever spend time with otherwise, fire up the grill at a home they probably owe thousands of dollars on, just 3 months after they send up to half of their income to the IRS,
Right.
to congratulate each other on how free they are.
Right.
This is ironic to the point of nauseam. But that is the state of our country. Americans these days are languishing in a euphoric delusion, as I put it. A euphoric delusion of freedom that arrests progress. It completely paralyzes our society from ever getting out of our condition that we find ourselves in. And they're suffering from a self-righteous indignation if you ever dare to question the status quo. Try bringing that up when at the next 4th of July picnic, and you say, I don't believe we're actually free in this country because of X, Y, and Z. They're going to look at you like you're crazy or you're a troublemaker. They have logical fallacies in lieu of actual rational discussion. They say things like, America, love it or leave it.
Right.
Or if you don't think this is the freest country in the world, I'll help you pack and move to North Korea.
Right.
As though that were actually a rational argument, as though that were actual rationality. Let's discuss this thing and come to a conclusion. That is an emotional reaction to rationality, but it is not rationality. It's based on a fear of admitting the truth. And that truth is, America is not free. America has not been free in any meaningful sense for many decades. But to make this statement is to commit a kind of treason. George Orwell said it best when he said, "Truth is treason in an empire of lies." It's like the boy in the children's story by Hans Christian Andersen who said what no one else could bring themselves to admit. The emperor has no clothes. Think about it. They had just come to a party, a celebration, a parade about how cool those clothes were. And then we're going to say there are no clothes? The clothes that he had, they were all going to celebrate, and yet he didn't even have any. Think of the irony in that. And yet that's exactly the situation we find ourselves in. We have parades, fireworks, grill outs to celebrate freedoms that are every bit as fictional as the clothes that supposedly adorn the emperor's back. We're celebrating a ghost, a figment of our imaginations.
Right.
Why we lost our freedoms is a topic for another time, but in a nutshell, sin is what has robbed this once great country of the freedoms we once possessed. In Proverbs 28:2, the Bible tells us, "For the transgression of a land, many are the princes thereof." And I might add, many are the laws thereof. If you want big government, sin will bring it, just as sure as anything. In fact, according to Harvey Silvergate, who wrote 3 felonies a day, there are so many laws, the average American commits 3 felonies before bedtime and doesn't even know it. A society of people who refuse to govern themselves by God's laws have now been subjected and turned over to an overwhelming onslaught of tyrannical regulations and statutes that are impossible to actually obey, and therefore we've become entrapped by them and enslaved by them. The only solution I could see is to first acknowledge that there is this problem and to then subject ourselves to the truth of Jesus and His Word. Christ pointed this out to the sinful leaders of the Jewish society that He found Himself in, who were at that time occupied by Rome. And the exchange was rather interesting. Here's what they said. Jesus said unto them, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. He offered them freedom. And what did they say while they're sitting here under the tyrannical rule of Rome, who was oppressing them and subjecting them to tribute? They answered Him, we be of Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? Think of that response. Think of the asininity of such a response. While they were being occupied by a foreign Gentile force, they said, why would you talk to us about being free? We're already free. We're the freest country in the world. Haven't you heard? Jesus answered them, verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. And we in America are the servants of sin. Amen. In the most literal way possible. This past 4th of July, I spent the entire day thinking about this staggering level of denial that we have in our society that was very much like the denial apparent in Christ's society as well. And I typed out 100 things that would be different if we were as free as the digitally lobotomized, mentally enslaved morons insist that we are in this country. What would that society look like if it were really as free as they say it was, that it is? I typed out 100 things. I could easily have typed out 100 more. In fact, I couldn't type them out fast enough because they kept coming to me so fast I couldn't even type them out. Because we're not free in this country, and I'm going to prove it by just 100 things that each individually represent a smoking gun, but taken together scream out, we are not free. The emperor has no clothes. This is a wake-up call, so to speak. 100 things. I'm just going to go through them in no particular order. Number one, if we were free, taxation wouldn't steal about half of our earnings. You realize you work the first 5 months of the year on average just to pay your free government to keep you free? Number two, if we were free, the national debt would be zero. How can our society be enslaved so much so that our grandchildren are going to be paying the interest on our national debt and yet say we're free? Debt is not freedom unless you're reading 1984. Debt is slavery. And our national debt is unprecedented, and it is unsustainable, and we've reached the point of no return. If we were free, like they say we are, the laws in this country would not be too numerous to count. Literally too numerous to count. Look it up. No one knows just how many laws we have in this land anymore. In this country, there are literally too many laws to count. We've lost count. We don't know how many. In 2010 alone, they passed 40,000 new laws in this country. 40,000 laws. And ignorance of the law is not a valid objection or excuse? How? We don't even know how many laws there are anymore. Possibly 1 million in this country. And you have to know every last one of them. If we were free, we could fish for our supper without asking and paying the government for permission. Did you ever see that YouTube video of that guy who was arrested for merely fishing for his supper? And he tried to, I don't know if it worked out well or not, but the judge didn't seem to take too kindly to it, but he insisted, I was just fishing for my supper. I'm a natural man. I have a right to feed myself from the common streams and lakes of this territory. That's all I was doing. I wasn't trying to get a trophy on the wall. That's illegal in our free country. If we were free, we could pick up a bird's feather from the sidewalk without fear of committing a felony in the event that it was from a protected species. If they find you with the feather from a bald eagle, even if you just picked it up from the sidewalk, felony. You can never vote again. You can never own guns again. You're a felon in the land of the free. I'm tired of this nonsense. I'm tired of this apathy. I'm tired of this denial, this hypnosis. We're not free, and if we were, everything would be different. Everything would be different. Number 6, if we were free, we could hunt to feed our families without paying the government for permission in the form of a license, or going to jail for getting the wrong species in the wrong season. If you were free, it wouldn't matter what kind of animal you were killing, so long as it wasn't someone else's property, and so long as you were just trying to feed your family. That would be a free society.
right.
But that's not the way it is today. Remember Robin Hood? They were killing the king's deer. That's where we find ourselves now. Everything belongs to the king.
Right.
And you have to pay for permission just to get something out of the woods to feed your family with. If we were free, the police would not resemble an occupation military force.
That's right.
People in this country are being pulled over by tanks.
Yeah.
They're having their doors bashed in by what can only be described as a military occupation force.
Right.
With riot gear, state-of-the-art technology for suppressing an entire population of militants. We are living in a police state, and there's no denying it.
Right.
If we were free, our right to keep and bear arms would not be limited, infringed, and subject to licensing. Why do you have to pay the government for permission to do something that God already told you you could do and the Constitution protects?
Right. Amen.
If we were free, that would be different. If we were free, we could sell milk. You know, like your grandparents used to do? And you wouldn't have to worry about the SWAT team coming in and arresting you like they've done many times. Because you didn't properly cook the milk long enough to get rid of all of the nutrients. And you didn't apply for the proper licensing. Translation, money. So you're going to jail. You're forfeiting all of your property. If we were free, we would be allowed to own any of the herbs bearing seed that God gave us. This one is particularly unpopular in evangelical circles. But the fact of the matter is, it is immoral to put a man in jail, to put a man in prison, in a cage, for owning a plant. But nowadays, that's what we see in our society. If you own a plant, for whatever purpose it may be, if that plant is called marijuana, you now go to jail for a very long time. You've harmed no one, but you still go to jail for simply owning a plant. That is absurd, and that is not a free society. If we were free, we would not have the largest prison population on the planet, with 25% of all prisoners in the world incarcerated here in the land of the free. One out of every 4 inmates in the world is housed in the United States of America. Population-wise, I think we account for like 4.5% of the world's population, and yet our prison population accounts for 25%. Do the math. That doesn't add up. That right there, smoking gun. We are not free in any sense of the word. If we were free, 90% of our prison inmates would not be in prison for non-violent crimes. These are people who did not hurt anyone. The overwhelming majority of prison inmates did not hurt anyone. In fact, most of them simply fell into the trap of violating one of these literally countless laws that don't make any sense. If we were free, we could remodel or add on to our homes without paying the government for permission. Why is it that you buy a house and you want to make some changes, you have to pay the government for permission to do something that you would otherwise be allowed to do if you were truly free like you say you are? If we were free. Yeah, exactly. If we were free, we wouldn't have to pay the government for permission to feed our families in many, if not most of the occupations. This one is something that just goes right under our radar. We don't even realize it, but many, if not most of the occupations in this country require you to have a license from the government to do it. You can't make a living without asking the government and paying the government for permission to do it. How's that freedom? If we were free, the bulk of federal revenues would be from small tariffs, not the protective tariffs that subsidize favored industries and businesses, but small tariffs on imports and exports. That was the original plan for revenue for the federal government that was put into the Constitution. Now we get it from all over. We get it from your income. We get it from driving. We get it from school, from your property. We get taxes from everything. We're taxed by, I can't even remember how many taxes the average citizen is subjected to, but I know it's over 100. It used to be, for the most part, the federal government got their revenue from tariffs. Very non-imposing. That would have been a free society for the most part. We haven't had that in over 100 years. Thanks to Mr. Lincoln. If we were free, number 16, our right to defend ourselves would also be honored in parks, schools, airports, post offices, federal buildings, courthouses, military installations, etc. But unfortunately, you don't have a right to defend yourselves with lethal force in any of those places. You only have a right to defend yourselves, in these particular designated areas. That's not freedom. If we were free, and here's an ironic one for you, you could shoot off any kind of firework you wanted to.
Amen.
While we're busy shooting off fireworks on the 4th of July, did it ever sink in that you can't shoot off, especially in our state, in particular, Florida, many regulations on just what you can do to celebrate that freedom you don't actually have. You can shoot off these fireworks, but make sure they don't actually get off the ground, make sure they don't go boom, make sure they just sit there and fizzle for a little while. That's okay freedom. That's government-approved freedom. I've got my license to prove it. That's not freedom. If we were free, states could secede when they deemed it in their best interest without fear of genocidal military invasion, subjugation, and forced occupation. But since the war between the states, we have seen quite the contrary. If a state tries to act in our best interest and join or leave a club or a group, what could happen? Well, we saw it happen. Genocidal occupation by the federal government. We are being held in this free country, quote unquote, at the force of guns. By the threat of violence. How is that free? That's like saying, oh, my wife and I have a long, happy marriage of 20 years. Yeah, but what you're not saying is you threatened her every night. If she leaves you, you're going to shoot her dead. How is that a happy, long marriage? That's what we're in right now with the federal government. If we were free, we would not have occupation forces in virtually every country of the world.
That's exactly right.
How are we free if we have to support and pay for a military to set up bases in almost every single country in the world? I fail to see how that's freedom. To me, that sounds like insecurity, if anything. But we have to maintain the most awful military force the world has ever seen because freedom isn't free. Freedom isn't free. If we were free, the government would not rob us to pay lazy people not to work.
That's right.
Entitlements make up, I think, 2/3 of the federal budget. 2/3 of the federal budget go to paying people not to work, essentially. Now, I'm not against helping people out. But if we were free, we could do so on our own choice.
Right.
We as a church could help someone out. Their families could help them out. But the government now sticks a gun in your face and they say, give us your taxes so that we can give to these people because we've deemed them unable to work. Because in many cases, they're lazy or making excuses. Now, there are some legitimate problems, of course. But I don't trust the federal government to make those decisions. I don't trust the state governments to make those decisions. But I don't have that choice. They took it away from us. That's not freedom.
Right.
If we were free, we would not be extorted for driving faster than an arbitrarily determined limit. Do you know how they set driver's limits? Speeding limits? They measure how fast people go because generally people go as fast as they feel is safe, and then they set that as the limit. That's the official story. So why is it that it always seems that the speed limits are posted about 5 to 10 miles under what feels safe to drive? Because that's how they get revenue. That's how they get money from you, because you were going faster than that sign right there with the pretty little numbers printed on it, so you owe me money. It's a revenue racket. It's not freedom. If we were free, like people say we are, the federal government would not own 28% of our land.
Right.
Over a quarter of all the land in our country is owned by the federal government, not by private individuals, not by companies, not by state governments, but by the federal government. Why do they need over 25% of our land if we're free? If we were free, we would be allowed to collect our own rainwater. I mean, that's a fundamental right, isn't it? I buy land, I live on that land, I set out some stuff to collect the rainwater, to be frugal. Boom, you're going to jail. In many places, it is currently illegal in this land of the free to collect the water that falls out of the sky from God. That is evil, and that is not freedom.
Amen.
If we were free, we could choose whether or not to have auto insurance. I'm all for paying your bills and for making restitution. But to say that I have to buy a service from someone, government mandated, and I don't get to choose whether or not I'm going to set my own money aside, or whether I'm going to pool my money with a few of my neighbors, or whatever the case may be, I have to go to one of these companies. That's not freedom. If we were free, we could choose whether or not to have health insurance. But, of course, thanks to Obamacare and plenty of government intrusion to keep us protected, to keep us healthy, of course, all in the name of the better good. We don't have freedom. If we were free, we would not have to pay the government for permission to drive our own vehicles. Think about it. If it's your car, why can't you drive it? What's next? A license to walk? This is an infringement on our inherent God-given right to transportation, to travel. But you have to pay the government. That's not freedom. If we were free, we would not have to pay the government for permission to cross national borders. I'm not impressed by this line drawn in the sand that the government says you have to pay us for a stringent review process to get in this country, unless we don't mind if you come across this country from one particular border. But the fact of the matter is, and I've said this for several years, it's very unpopular, like I said, amongst evangelicals or conservatives in general, but the fact is, immigration regulation, if you think about it, presupposes government ownership of all property. Who is the government to tell me who I can or cannot let come and rent my property? Think about it. That's not freedom. If we were free, we could hire who we wanted to, regardless of their citizenship status. That goes along the same lines. If I have money that is mine, because I've worked hard with my labor, which I own, and I've produced money out of the fruits of my labor, which I own, and I want to hire someone to work at a business, which I own, I should be able to hire them. But I'm not if they don't have a green card. That's not freedom. And I don't care if 90% of America disagrees with me on that. If we were free, we could choose who we did business with on any basis of discrimination. Think about that. If I wanted to pick someone who had blue eyes to work for me because whatever, that would be freedom for me to make such a decision. On whatever basis I have for that decision, that's irrelevant. That's my decision if I live in a free country like we're supposed to be living in. If we were free, number 27, number 30, we could build a shed on our own property without paying the government for permission. Can't even build a shed in most cities without getting a permit. Don't you love that? On your property, with your money, with your materials, you have to ask them and pay them for permission. If we were free, number 31, we wouldn't care nearly as much about who was running for president. But that is a symptom of the sickness that we are plagued with in this country. People care more about the celebrity who's up there trying to get into the presidency than they do about things that actually matter in this country. And that is just a sign of our enslavement. Because we've been distracted from actually getting involved in our local government, actually getting involved in things that matter. All we care about is some guy whose job really, according to the Constitution, is only to make sure that everything is done constitutionally. That's the only role the president is even supposed to have. If anyone is supposed to be the number one guy to look at in the race, it would be the governor or the sheriff, not the president. If we were free, we would know more about our state legislature than about Kim the Trash Can Kardashian. But unfortunately, we once again love to follow celebrities as a sign of the enslavement that plagues us. If we were free, street preachers would not be arrested for using amplification or failing to pay the government for permission to be on public property. And yet this is happening all over the country. I myself have faced this kind of harassment. Not even being allowed to stand on public property and proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. Why? Because I don't have a permit. I haven't paid the government for that freedom. That's not freedom. If I have to ask for permission and pay for that permission, that's something I've purchased. That's not freedom. If we were free, we could sell prepared food without paying the government for permission and getting a second commercial kitchen. Why is it I can't actually cook something and sell it to my neighbor? I say, hey, you like, let's say you like burritos. I make some really good burritos. How about every Friday night I sell you a couple burritos for a couple bucks? You know, freedom of exchange, free trade, free market, all of these buzz phrases we like to use, but they don't actually exist in this country. You have to get a license. You have to build a second kitchen on there, the full commercial kitchen, just to make those 2 burritos every Friday night. That's not freedom. If we were free, the government would not be reading our emails, storing our phone data, listening to our conversations, and monitoring social media posts. Everything that Edward Snowden confirmed has been suspected for over a decade. And finally, us tin hat people were vindicated when he came out and proved that this has been the case. Our government apparently fears us so much that they have to read our emails, they have to listen to our phone conversations, they have to monitor who we're calling, when we're calling them, in a way that would make the Soviet Union rather impressed. Because now we have the technology to do much more than they ever did. If we were free, we could sell our airline tickets to our neighbors and friends if we chose not to go on a trip, right? Why can't we do that anymore? Regulations. If we were free, we could board an airplane without being groped, radiated, and digitally undressed in Nazi-style turnstiles like the cattle that we actually are. But you can't travel without first going through the farmer's or the shepherd's little turnstile. Make sure we get you radiated, making sure we get you checked in. We can't just board an airplane, and if we cause problems, we're asked to leave. No. We have to go through a thorough evaluation process that usually involves a lot of money, harassment. It's conditioning us, really, to our slavery. If we were free, we could opt out of the Ponzi scheme known as Social Security.
That's right.
You know, when Social Security was first enacted, I think it was like 60 workers per retiree at the time. Now it's down to, I believe, 3. It's going to crash soon.
Oh, yeah.
Very soon. That's unsustainable. And I don't have the freedom to opt out. That's not freedom. If we were free, we wouldn't have individual inventory numbers, like cattle, under the guise of a mandatory requirement program.
Yeah.
Social Security. I have to have a number. Just like cattle. Just like a prison inmate. Because I'm not free.
Right.
If we were free, we wouldn't have, our government wouldn't define marriage. Why does the government have to define something so unrelated to government as marriage? Something so religious inherently as a relationship between a man and a woman under God? Why does government have to get in and tell us what marriage is or is not? That's not a free society. If we were free, we would formulate ideas independent of those talking heads given us by the powers that be. But instead, the average American cannot formulate their own opinion about anything. They merely pick one of the 2 pre-chosen positions given them on the media every night. And they pick one of those, and they think that they can choose. It's the illusion of choice. If we actually were free, we would not be under the impression that voluntary sterilization was a good idea. It's kind of starting to get a little personal here, I know, but think about this. Previous civilizations would consider this mockery. That we choose to sterilize ourselves? So our civilization can die off and our values go unpropagated? This is mass madness.
Right.
We'll never need forced sterilization by the government. They won't need to do that to us. You know why? Because they've tricked us into thinking that we should do it voluntarily. It's absurd. And it's a sign of the enslavement that we are in. If we were free, our first thought when wanting to do something major would not be, who do I need to get a permit from for that? Want to have a big festival or start a business or build something? The first thought in the average American's head is, better check with, who do I need to check with about that? I need to ask someone for a permit about that, I'm sure. That is the sign of an enslaved police state, not a free society. Listen to your head every now and then when that thing pops in. Oh, maybe I'm not free, because otherwise I wouldn't feel the need to ask permission for every little thing like Mother May I.
Amen.
If we were free, we wouldn't have to turn in our vehicle deeds in exchange for government tags. You could keep your deed, but instead you have to turn it in at the local government office, and they give you their tag to put on your vehicle as a sign of ownership, because it's not actually yours, because you have no freedom. If we were free, there would be no federal funding for local police agencies. That is a conflict of interest if I've ever seen one. Why does the federal government pay our local cops? Oh, we elect the sheriff. Sure you do. Who pays him? Federal government. We are not free. If we were free, families wouldn't live in fear of having their children taken from them. But that is a very real fear in this society. If we were free, you wouldn't need to opt your children out of mandatory vaccination programs. They wouldn't be mandatory. If we were free, we wouldn't automatically be medicated with fluoride in the water supply. You would have a choice of what medicines you took, but you don't. If we were free, anyone could live on their land in a camper trailer or a tent if they so chose. But you know what? You can't in many places, in many cities, in many counties. It's against the law to live in a camper trailer or a tent on your own property. You have to buy one of their nice fancy houses and hook up to their real nice power grid. If we were free, anyone could live off-grid, whether in city limits or not. People are going to jail, they're being fined simply because they want to generate their own power or drill a well and pump water out of the ground because they're living within the government jurisdiction. What does that tell you? You're not free.
Right.
If we were free, we could work for whatever wage we agreed to with our employer. But instead, the government gets to insert themselves into a private party agreement and say, oh, you're happy paying him $5 an hour? Oh, you're happy making $5 an hour? Too bad! You have to pay him $8 something an hour. Or you both get fined or go to jail. If we were free, we could work for as many or few hours as we agreed to with our employer. Private agreements would reign. But instead, especially with the youth, they're regulated to certain periods of time that they can and cannot work. That's not freedom. If we were free, we could sell anything the market demanded. See a need, meet a need. Even if it was something frowned upon by society in general. Drugs, guns, etc. If you were free, you could make that choice. Society wouldn't make it for you. If we were free, we could use midwife services freely. Do you know it's illegal in some states to use a midwife? Something that 70% of Europe does as the norm? It's illegal here? How is that freedom? Number 55. If we were free, we could have home births without the risk of losing our children if something came up and went wrong. You know, if something goes wrong and you've chosen to have a home birth instead of using the nice hospitals that we've prepared for you, then you're looked on as some kind of horrible person who doesn't love your children. And you could have those children taken away from you. A parent's worst nightmare. And you just wanted to have a natural home birth? Losing your children, that's not freedom. If we were free, we could practice homeopathic medicine without paying the government for permission or being persecuted by the FDA. But instead, if you have a natural remedy that actually cures a common cold and you say, hey, this cures the cold, boom, massive fines, maybe prison, because you dared solve a need without asking the government permission, without asking the pharmaceutical conglomerates permission. If we were free, anyone could study and practice medicine without a formal degree and government license. What if you just devoted your life to self-teaching on the issues of medicine? And then you decided to heal people. Well, these days you'd be put in prison, sued, fined. If we were free, anyone could study and practice law without a formal degree and government license. Why can't we study the law books like used to be the common way of doing things? People would get in law, they would study this, and they could give people advice. And if it was good enough advice, they could charge for it. That's called practicing law. Nowadays, you could get in big trouble if you do that without a license. If we were actually free, you could buy electricity without a government inspection of your hookup. Now think about that. I had to get a hookup on my land, and before the company who provides the electricity could give me the electricity I was going to pay them for, the government had to come out and make sure that the connection was satisfactory to their requirements. That's not freedom. If I want to burn my house down, that's my decision. That's not theirs. I don't need Big Brother looking after me. If I did, I'd ask him. But we don't have that choice. If we were free, homeowners wouldn't be tried for firing in self-defense when police conduct no-knock raids at the wrong address in the middle of the night. But people actually go to jail for doing this, for merely defending their homes in the middle of the night when someone barges in with a gun. Oops, he was a cop. Oh well. You know, next time we need some proper notice, get the right address perhaps.
Exactly.
If we were free, we wouldn't have sobriety checkpoints. What business is it of the government's what I'm doing in my own vehicle? If I cause a problem, if I hurt someone, that's the proper sphere of government. But if I'm not hurting anyone, stay out. But they don't because we're not free. If we were free, we wouldn't have immigration checkpoints, especially those 50 miles from the border, pulling people over, asking them, are you a citizen? Do you expect me to tell you if I am, if I'm not? They're not after immigration violations. What they're really after is control. They're looking for drugs, something they can make some money off of. If we were free, jurors would judge the law as well as the facts.
That's right.
Now, don't get me wrong, jurors have the right And nothing can take that away from them to judge whether a law is bad and find the person innocent based on the law. But they don't do it because they're told it's impossible or it's illegal or that they're not allowed, and so they don't do it as a general practice in this country because they've been misinformed by government corruption in the justice system. If we were free, we could educate our children as we saw fit without asking the government for permission or complying with standards set by bureaucrats. We could actually be in charge of our children as God intended.
Amen.
If we were free, number 65, the government couldn't assassinate you with a drone before a jury of your peers even convicted you. But nowadays, that can happen. We've already assassinated U.S. citizens with no trial, no due process. Somebody punched a button in government and 2 people died.
Yeah.
U.S. citizens. That's not a free society.
Amen.
If we were free, we could buy sinus medication without showing a local driver's license.
Yeah.
I was working a little ways from home, about 40 miles away, and I couldn't breathe. My hay fever was messing up. I went in to get some sinus medicine, and they told me, "Oh, your license is from the next town over. Sorry, we're not allowed to sell this to you." Wait, do I need a permission slip from my mother? This isn't freedom. If we were free, we could own a shotgun with a barrel shorter than 18 inches or a fully automatic weapon. That could be my choice. That could be your choice. But it's not because it's already been made for you. Those weapons are too dangerous for you. Sorry. If we were free, there would be no such thing as a gag order. Why can a judge tell someone, you've been arrested for this, you want to tell the media that you're innocent, that you're being persecuted? Too bad. Here's a gag order. You say anything, you're going to be in more trouble.
Yeah.
What happened to the First Amendment? What happened to the freedoms that we think we have? If we were free, you could conduct transactions with your bank in amounts greater than $10,000 without getting reported to the IRS, like Dr. Hovind was persecuted over. Nowadays, the bank has to tell the IRS what you're doing with your own money. If we were free, number 70, you could travel overseas without having to tell the government your private business in order to get back into the country. You know those little slips? You have to tell the government what you bought, how much it was worth, etc., just to get back in the country. That's not freedom. If we were free, we could build a business next to or onto our home, regardless of zoning laws. But nowadays, the government determines what your community or your region where your property is fit for. You want to live there? Well, let's check the zoning laws. Okay, yeah, you can live there, but you can't make a business there. Well, what if I want to run a business out of my garage? What if I want to expand on that garage? What if I want to just actually exercise free market principles here and meet some needs that my neighbors have and actually help people in exchange for money that I use to feed my family? It's a pipe dream. Move to Costa Rica or someplace. You're not going to do that here. If we were free, our money wouldn't lose half of its buying power every decade due to inflation. We're being taxed and we don't even know it. We lose half of our purchasing power every decade due to inflation. If we were free, you couldn't be imprisoned on charges of conspiracy for living in the same house as someone who does drugs. You know, they go to jail just for living in the same home as someone who did drugs. They may or may not have even known about it, but they're charged with conspiracy, and that's the end of it for them. If we were free, our money would be worth something rather than being backed only by the threat of government. The only reason the dollar has any value, what little remains of it, is because our military threatens governments around the world to continue using it as their reserve currency on threat of invasion, of assassinations, of military invention. If you don't keep our dollars in your economy, we're going to liberate you.
Yeah.
How do you like that? If we were free, our money would not be confiscated and used to pay off other countries to the tune of billions of dollars every day. This government takes money out of your pocket and pays tyrannical dictators around the world to not cause problems for our government. Protection money, bribe money, that's not freedom. If we were free, you couldn't have your child taken away for choosing natural cancer treatments over cancer-causing radiation and chemotherapy. If you make a health decision for your child the government doesn't agree with, you could lose your child. In fact, a very infamous case happened a few years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. The parents completely lost custody of their daughter, and they forced her to have chemotherapy when they had already chosen with their daughter, who was I think like 15 at the time, you're not going to. We don't want to do that because it's going to hurt you. She agreed with them. It was a family decision. The government said, sorry, you must think you're free. we're going to take your daughter now and make her take chemotherapy. If we were free, we wouldn't have to give our entire life history just to get a driver's license that then registers us in a federal database. The real ID is tyranny, not freedom. If we were free, we could gamble online if we so desired. I'm not for gambling, but I think we should be allowed to make our own decisions as adults, shouldn't we? Anything that is wrong should not necessarily be illegal. Not in a free society. If we were free, our money would not be taken from us to bail out private corporations who make bad business decisions. It's not freedom for me to have to give my money at the point of a gun to someone who squandered theirs. If we were free, our firearms would not be seized during hurricanes or other disasters. Remember Katrina? They went door to door, kicking doors in, hurting people, taking away their guns because there was a storm? Because there was a hurricane? That's when I need my guns the most, when there's lawlessness and disorder. I need to protect my family. Well, you don't get to because we're protecting them. Don't you worry, we got you covered. If we were free, there would be no governmental no-fly list.
That's right.
It's like the government's version of timeout. Sorry, you don't get to fly. Go sit in the corner. If we were free, we wouldn't need free speech zones. The country would be a free speech zone, right?
That's right.
I mean, if we were free, why do you need a zone to be free in?
Exactly.
It's kind of a smoking gun there, isn't it? If we were free, you could give an impromptu tour of Washington, D.C. without going to jail for 90 days. Did you catch that? If you decide to give a tour of some of the monuments at D.C. because you know a lot about D.C., maybe you live there, and you don't have a license from the government, you could sit in jail for 90 days just for touring the capital of this land of freedom. If we were free, number 84, we could let our children play in the yard, unsupervised, without going to jail or losing our children. 11-year-old he got home from school a little before his parents did. They took him away, arrested his parents. He wasn't supervised. Guess you thought you were free. If we were free, the world wouldn't hate us the way they do.
That's right.
We used to be free, and they flocked to us. They loved us. They don't hate us for our freedoms. They hate us for our tyranny,
That's right.
for our enslavement, because the slavery that exists in this country is so despicable that it is leaking out into the countries around us, and the world fears us and the tyranny that our government exports.
Yeah.
If we were free, we could own a pet deer without going to jail. You know, my family found a deer that apparently had been tamed one time. I helped my father catch it. We put it in a cage. We called the authorities, said, hey, we've got a deer here. He's apparently tame. You better come pick him up, because if we turn him loose, the dogs or something is just going to tear him apart. And they said, well, we'll send somebody over, but they might arrest you because you own a wild animal and you don't have a license. If we were free, we wouldn't be required to file paperwork with the IRS every year disclosing all of our most intimate financial data.
Amen.
Why is it I have to tell the government every little thing about my finances if I were supposedly free? If we were free, ministers could solemnize marriages in which no government license was purchased without fear of being prosecuted by the government. If you don't get a government license, if you don't pay the government for permission to get married under God, and a preacher actually partakes in that ceremony, guess what? He could be in big trouble. If we were free, we could host Bible studies in our own homes without being locked up for 60 days for violating, guess what? Zoning laws. That's how they get you. A preacher was locked up for 60 days for simply having a Bible study in his own home because he wasn't zoned for that. If we were free, we could grow vegetables in our front yards, and not just lawn grass. But in many places, it's illegal to grow more than, or grow less than, 90 or 80% of grass in your yard. You have to grow grass, not vegetables, because that would break some law somewhere. If we were free, we wouldn't be 8 times more likely to be killed by a cop than by a terrorist. By their own numbers, by the way. The government's own numbers say that you're 8 times more likely to die by the gun of a cop than by a terrorist. You know, cops kill over 1,000 people in this country every year. Guess how many they killed in Canada over the past decade? 12.
So who are the terrorists?
Who are the real terrorists in this country? Maybe the terrorists that we've been led to fear are really just a false boogeyman who's been set up to keep us distracted from the real terrorists in this country. If we were free, you couldn't be arrested for attempting to pay a highway toll with cash. That happened right here in Florida. Someone tried to just pay their highway toll with cash. You know, the stuff that says legal tender for all debts, public and private. They were put in prison for that. A jury found them guilty. If we were actually free, the federal government would not be allowed to imprison us indefinitely without so much as formal charges, indefinite detention. The government now has the power to put you in prison and never even charge you and never let you go. How is that constitutional? How is that freedom? If we were free, the federal government would not reserve the right of extraordinary rendition by which they can transport you as a U.S. citizen to another country to torture you, since doing so in this country would pose certain legal obstacles.
What did you call that?
Extraordinary rendition. It's one of the great freedoms we enjoy here. If we were free, there would not be a surveillance camera mounted on nearly every telephone pole, street corner, and traffic light in this country, monitoring what you're doing, where you're going, how fast you're driving. If we were free, number 96, public school students across the nation wouldn't be required to wear RFID tracking chips. You know, many schools around the country are starting to require students to wear RFID tracking chips to monitor where they're at and what they're up to. Like cattle? Like you might put in your dog or something? If we were free, students wouldn't be arrested, minors being arrested for burping in class or drawing pictures of guns. These are actual things that have happened, okay? I didn't collect all my sources, but I'll tell you right now, you can go on Google or Bing or Yahoo and search these things and you can find them like that. These are not disputed facts. These are easily findable, this is easily findable information. This is what is common knowledge in America. If we were free, the President of the United States would not claim the power to choose if a citizen is to be tried in a military tribunal or a jury trial. Did you know the President believes he has the right to choose whether or not you get a trial by jury of your peers? He can choose for you. He can choose that you are now tried by a military tribunal. That's not freedom. If we were free, you wouldn't have to register your pets with the government. In many counties, you have to tell the government you have a pet and you have to get them registered. You have to put them on a registry because the government gets to decide whether or not you can have that pet. Lastly, number 100. If we were free in this country, police would not be setting up fake cell phone towers across the nation called stingrays to collect your cell phone data secretly without a warrant, thus localizing the surveillance state and adding yet one more to the list of government bodies spying on your every move and communication, making you that much more a prisoner and a slave. No warrants. You could just drive by this cell phone tower not even knowing that it wasn't a real cell phone tower. It was a stingray, and it just collected everything on your phone. It's time to stop rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's time to recognize that the latest celebrity running for president is not going to solve our problems. It's time to face facts. Americans need to come to grips with the bleak reality in this country, and it's not a popular, positive message. I'd love to tell you your better life now, but this is bad news.
Amen.
But it's reality, and we need to face the facts. Everything is illegal in this country. We're not free.
Amen.
This country cherishes statism and tyranny. They prefer it. They feel uncomfortable with freedom. We've passed the point of political reform. Our only hope now is acknowledging that such a problem actually exists and then turning to God and calling out for mercy. Because really, at this stage of the game, only God can give us any help. Only God can save us from this bondage.